about 7,000 bereaved family members from across England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, who are supporters of the COVID Bereaved Families for Justice UK, a group which eventually you did meet with at one point.
I think that if you look at the age of the UK population, as I said earlier in my evidence, the comorbidities that we sadly have, the density of the UK population.
Well, let's look at that.
I think that Chris Wheat, the original prophecy of the chief medical officer, has turned out to be broadly correct.
Okay, well, let's look at that. You raise age and density. South Korea, a comparatively wealthy country of 52 million people, has an older population than the UK. It has a population density of almost twice the UK, and it had a quarter of the UK's deaths.
Can I try a bunch of explanation for that? And I think the answer is well known to people who followed it, and that is because, in no way to detract from the wonderful efforts of South Korean healthcare, but they already had substantial experience of plague, SARS, and other such diseases, and were well prepared, and arguably better prepared than the UK.
Yes.
To tackle something like this. If you look at notwithstanding what you say, if you look at the comparator countries in Europe, you haven't mentioned the United States, which had significantly higher mortality. The UK, given the elderliness of the population, the comorbidities, I do not think it is fair to say that the UK did significantly worse than others.
With respect, that's deflecting from my point, isn't it, by going off and talking about another country? I've given you the full picture here and asked you to comment on it.
I'm giving you... So you asked me for my opinion about South Korea. Now you're saying that I shouldn't be talking about another country.
No. Well, okay. South Korea, that segues me into my next point about what happened in March. So it was only by mid-March, wasn't it, that the United Kingdom government was serious about sourcing ventilators and oxygen supply and PPE and protective clothing. And it had failed to source anywhere near enough tests, as evidenced by much of the evidence that no doubt you followed in this inquiry. That's the reality. You got to mid-March without having addressed all of these issues of testing and PPE.
Well, it took a long time before we had a convenient lateral flow test that everybody could use anyway. And it took a while before that had been devised, partly thanks to work done at Porton Down.
Well,
and yes, it is, but yes, and I think it's one of the things that the inquiry needs to focus on is, yes, our diagnostics industry and capability was not strong enough at the time. Yes. COVID broke.
No doubt.
That's absolutely true.
No doubt.
One of the legacies, and I should have said this since you've mentioned test, it can allow me to segue conveniently into a point I wanted to make, but didn't. Actually, what happened was that we went up massively in our ability to test people.
Yes, later.
By the end of that year, we were doing, I think, 300,000 by September and 500,000.
Okay, let's stick to the point.
And since you make other comparisons with other countries,
yes,
it is worth bearing in mind.
Okay, but
our testing ability was by far the biggest in Europe.
Okay, you going back to the point about South Korea, by mid-March, South Korea had actually tested 5 times the number of people that the UK had tested. And the reason for that was partly because they had a history of learning from SARS and MERS, which apparently the UK hadn't. But also because you and the government had not seen the COVID coming over the horizon. You had seen it, but you hadn't acted on it. I mean, paragraph 46 of your statement, looking back, it's clear that we vastly underestimated the risks in those early weeks. If we'd properly understood how fast COVID was spreading, the fact that it was spreading asymptomatically, there are many things we would have done differently. If we realised that what this virus could do, then we would have immediately laid down stocks of PPE, checked PHE had diagnostic abilities, started the race for a vaccine and started to socialise the public. with the idea that they were going to have to do NPIs. That's your own words, that you failed to act on things like ramping up testing and PPE until it was too late.
Sorry, what my words say is that we didn't know at the time what we needed to do. But even had we known, we would not have been able in the time available to build up anything like the diagnostics capabilities that were necessary for a test and trace scheme. And the test and trace system was rapidly overwhelmed in every European country.
Well, the problem is you hadn't got started with it, Mr. Johnson. That's what you're saying in your self-reflection in your statement, isn't it? The reality is.
No, that's not true. We had a test and trace system, and we could already test and trace people, but it was nothing like big enough. And what I hope will be one of the legacies of this exercise is that we will have a much bigger diagnostics industry, as indeed we now do.
Well, the reality is that your government was reactive, not to what was on the horizon, but what was there in the here and now. And you've just reacted too late to provide PPE, source PPE, or source testing. Isn't that the reality of it?
No. As soon as we understood the scale of the problem, we shifted heaven and earth to get both things. And I think by the end of the year, I think something like 35 billion items of PPE that we'd.
By the 5th of April, the BBC were reporting, still on the website, headline: Coronavirus, the NHS workers wearing bin bags as protection. 3 days later, the Daily Telegraph ran a similar article. Even after the first lockdown had started, you were woefully short of PPE and testing because you hadn't reacted when it came on the horizon in January. Ramped up testing capacity, ramped up PPE.
No, so even if we'd appreciated and I've explained that we didn't understand the scale and the pace of the virus's advance, but even if we had, I don't believe that it would have made that much difference in January, because the stocks were not great around the world. And if you remember what happened, we had a terrible situation in March when there were struggles virtually at airports over consignments of PPE to make sure they went from one country to one country rather than
the documents show that at the beginning of March, which is when you first started to chair COBRA and you went to the hospital shaking hands with COVID patients, at the beginning of March, that the CCS, Civil Service Secretariat, was still scoping matters such as PPE and testing. By the 26th of April, well into a month into the first lockdown, there's a private email between you and Dominic Cummings, where you say that the TNT, the test and trace plans, were, quote, whistling in the dark with, quote, legions of imaginary Clouseaus and no plan to hire them, and an app that doesn't work. And finally this, quote, we got to turn it around. That's what you were saying a month into lockdown about testing.
Well, what I was also being told, if you think about the evidence that had been given to me to begin with, I was being told that we did have a very good test and trace system. I was told that we had ample preparation, and that turned out not to be true. So what you're rightly quoting is me responding to the reality and telling the system that we've got to go up several gears and sort it out.
Just for the record, the reference is 226-628 at page 21. But what you're doing there is you're saying the stable door's open, that the horse has bolted, and you're realising that there's no plans in place to ramp up the testing. You've told us this morning that in early March you didn't realise where on the curve you were. Well, part of the reason for that is that the UK didn't have enough tests.
UK's diagnostics industry was not as well developed when the pandemic began as others. That's absolutely correct.
And your government didn't do anything about it.
And that was because I was being told in those early weeks that we were well covered. And I think if you look at what Chief Medical Officer had to say, what Yvonne Doyle had to say around that time, you can see that they believe that we have a big testing capability.
Okay.
And that was what I was picking up. That turned out not to be true. We reacted. We then set up one of the biggest testing, well, I think probably certainly the biggest testing industries in Europe. And I want to thank Dido Harding very much for everything that she did.
Well,
she did a tremendous.
I put the point to you.
And I want to thank Paul Dighton for what he did on securing PPE.
You're deflecting again, Mr. Johnson, aren't you?
No, I'm telling you what we did.
I'm going to move on to a final point, if I may. And I'd like you to look, it's a different point, jumping to September, 11th of September. Can we have up on the screen, please, 280061, page 153. Now, this is September. Mr. Keith's dealt with much of this, so I can deal with it very quickly. This is a page from Professor Valence's diaries relating to that day. I'll read it just through quickly. 11th of September, schools data reviewed on the dashboard. You say, what am I being told? Is this a great triumph? Mr. Hancock says, yes, a great triumph. Professor Valence comments, care homes upward spiking cases over the past few days. Here we go again. You say, this is the critical point, or one of two critical points here. You say, we need to remember the grim history of March. And then Professor Valence called for a package of actions. Mr. Hancock refers to care home winter plan. And then you say, everyone says the rule of six is so unfair, punishing the young, but fuck you, Daily Mail.
I apologise for my language.
OK, well, it's in shouty capitals and underlined.
Well, not by me.
By Professor Valence. Look, this is all about stopping deaths. We need to tell them. Hospital admissions are clearly beginning to increase. But first of all, do you recall this and the flavour of it being accurate?
No, but what I can tell you, if indeed it is accurate, is that what I would have been saying is that this is September.
Yeah.
We're in a. You can see as I was saying earlier to Mr. Keith, to the inquiry, you can see the risk that the virus is going to start taking off again. I'm extremely worried.
Exactly what I'm putting it for.
And with great respect to you, sir, it looks to me as though what I'm saying here is that the priority is to, and I'm sorry to have said this about the Daily Mail, but the priority is to stop death.
Well, wait for the question. You were there recognising that we were back in a position not dissimilar to March. You're also recognising, with a reference to parts of the media, that you've got competing pressures, aren't you? That's what's going on. So you're saying, let's look for a package of measures.
I just for the avoidance of doubt, I don't think that this is meant to be a general criticism of that great organisation.
I'm not suggesting it is.
The press, the Daily Mail. There had presumably been something that they had said that had wound me up about the rule of six or whatever.
Here you're
and what I was saying was we need restrictions. And I think probably what I'm saying is, which I then did, because on the 9th, I say that we've got to have the rule of
six. That's where I'm going with this, Mr. Johnson. You're recognising, you've not got your head somewhere else. You're recognising the problem. You're back in a position not dissimilar to March. You're recognising something has to be done. And you're recognising there's opposition to that. So you've got this tension. That's right, isn't it? That's what this reflects.
And that's what was at the heart of the whole debate. And then, of course.
And then we get.
But I hope that everybody that you so ably represent understand. My priority was saving lives.
But then we get to the 21st of September with SAGE recommending this circuit breaker. Just 10 days later, circuit breaker with an attached package. And you reject it. You go with a tier system, which you never refer back to SAGE. SAGE never gets to look at SAGE.
Great respect. I think I can repeat, if you like, what I said to the Council for the Inquiry. But the gist of it is that I thought there were downsides to the proposed circuit breaker. It wasn't as simple as all that. It was immensely destructive. The risk was you'd have to keep doing it, as they themselves acknowledged. The Health Secretary himself didn't support it, and I thought that the best thing for at least for a while was to see if we could intensify the national measures and then go to...
Yes, you said that. Just this before I sit down, that what this demonstrates is that you understand the problem. You're caught in this tension between two sides, and you delay, and you're indecisive, and the actual proper measures that bring R down eventually are punted off until the infection has spread, and more people die.
I respectfully say that's total rubbish. And but I've tried to deal with that argument. I don't think it stacks up. I think if you look at both the timing of events in March, the sequence of things that we did, then the sequence of things that we did in September, October, November, they were reasonable. Our priority was to protect the NHS and save lives.